Good morning, Hassan Huskies. This is your principal, Dr. Miller. Today is Monday, December 2nd, 2024. I hope all of you had a wonderful Thanksgiving break with your families. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Hassan Huskies, it is December already, and that means that we have a super fun month planned for us. That also means that tomorrow, I will announce the November winners for gratitude. So that is coming. And in December, we are moving into empathy. And so for our first saying, we have empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling the heart of another. Sometimes we feel mad. We can tell when someone is mad by looking at their face and body and paying attention to what is happening. So for December, we are thinking about empathy. Hassan Huskies, it's also Monday morning, which means it's birthdays. Happy birthday. I have Macy in Mrs. Petter's room, Matthew and Mrs. Greenwald, Isla and Miss Doro, Nora and Miss Doro, Lucy and Mr. Spitzak, Monroe and Ms. Sylvester, Quinn and Mrs. Leach, Dax and Mr. Ashley, Fiona and Mrs. Leach, Jace and Mrs. Leach, and Marissa and Mrs. Craig. Also, happy June birthdays. We are doing half birthdays, and we have a lot of June half birthdays. We have Abel and Mrs. Oakland, Winifred and Mrs. Greenwald, Jezere and Mrs. Greenwald, Journey and Mr. Willenbring, Collins and Mrs. Spears, Leo and Mr. Jarvie, Kane and Mrs. Spears, Nima and Mr. Jarvie, Blair and Mrs. Reed, Amaris and Miss Doro, Lex and Mrs. Harns, Carter and Mrs. Greenwald, Levi and Mrs. Dazowski, Kaylee and Mrs. Greenwald, Jakari and Mrs. Dockendorf, Hunter and Mrs. Petter, Nora in Miss Choi's room, Evelyn and Mrs. Greenwald, and Colton and Mrs. Greenwald. Happy half birthday. All right, birthdays and half birthdays. When the announcements are over, please come down to the office and we will give you a birthday book and a birthday pencil. It's a great day to be a Husky. Hassan Huskies, please remember, you belong here.